It's some kind of card, it's some kind of computer system where you can ping that information against a database, and it's serious penalties for the employers who don't play by the rules. So that's pillar number one, enforcement. Pillar number two, we need legalization. And we need legalization not for the immigrants' sake, is not the way I see it. I see it as we need it for our sake as a country. The situation that we have now, we have 11, 12 million people here who aren't leaving. People come and go. Some of the new arrived people go back after a while, but if you've been here 5, 10, 15 years, are married, have U.S. citizen children, you're not leaving. So the undocumented population isn't leaving. It's not safe for us to have a population like that, a population the size of Pennsylvania, whose names we don't know and who've never undergone a background check. And it's not good for our values. I don't want to live in a kind of country where there's a whole population like that, an underground population that's not part of the system. That's not what democracy means to me. So, you know, we can argue about this pillar, about exactly what kind of hoops you want to make them go through. We can talk about how long you want to make them wait. Do they have to wait until the people waiting in line have already come through? You can talk about who exactly in that population. You know, we certainly don't want to give criminals legalization. We're going to do some kind of sorting. There are arguments to be had, but the bottom line for me is we have to have some system for those people to earn their way back in. And again, you can use whatever metaphor you want. You can use restitution. I kind of like earn. And I think they should be citizens. Again, people argue, should we just legalize them? Should we make them citizens? I think citizens are more consistent with our values. Do we really want do we want to legalize those people but have them here not being able to vote? That's not the kind of country I see myself living in. But the basic point is, you know, I think we can't pretend they don't exist. I think we can't pretend that if we just enforce the law a little more toughly, which is what Mark Krikorian would say if he was here, that they would go away. They're not going away. We're trying to enforce the law more toughly and they're not going away. But the third pillar, I'm coming to the third pillar, and the third pillar is actually the most important in my view, because if you think about the diagnosis and the root cause, really, of the dysfunction we have now, the root cause is that we don't have an adequate pipeline for the workers who we need to man and grow our economy to come here legally. I think the most important part of a reform is a pipeline that creates a way for the workers we need, the workers that do jobs that we don't do because we're not educated enough or too educated, to come into the country legally rather than illegally. That's the source of the problem. And I think we do have to make, again, there are things that you can argue about. Obviously that flow, as we saw from Jeff's presentation, rises and falls with the economy, and you want to have a system that accommodates that rise and fall. You don't want to be letting too many people in a year where we don't need those workers, but you also don't want to be choking the economy in a year when we do need those workers. We have to make sure that employers make every effort to hire Americans first. That has to be part of the law. We have to make sure that employers make every effort to treat the immigrants, more than an effort, that they do succeed in treating the immigrants fairly and the way they treat American workers. And we can argue about, should these workers be temporary? Should they be permanent? Should they be actually temporary workers who can eventually become permanent if they want to? And that's actually the model that appeals most to me. I think most people do come initially on a temporary basis. They come to try out their luck. And if they succeed here, if they do well on their jobs and they move up on their jobs and they start to assimilate, those are the kind of people I'd like to reward and say, well, maybe they could stay permanently. So my ideal policy would be a policy that started out with kind of provisional workers, where people earned the right to stay. But the basic point is the pipeline needs that we need to link the quotas in a flexible, real-time way to our genuine labor needs, both at the top and the bottom of the economy. And the problem is, and I'm coming to the conclusion here, is that in the real political world we live in today, that's going to be very hard to do. Trying to make this policy in a recession, trying to make this policy in a situation where the organized labor is going to be a very powerful voice in the debate and is hesitant about admitting more workers, especially temporary workers, is going to make adding that third leg, that leg where which I think is the most important leg, that leg where we create an adequate pipeline for the workers to come into the country. It's going to be hard to argue that in a recession and hard to get it in the current Washington. And that is going to be, I think, a lot of what the debate is going to be about this time. Yes, you're going to hear the talk radio people screaming amnesty and others arguing back, but a lot of the debate that's going to be new and different this time that didn't happen last time, and I urge you to pay attention to, and urge those of you who care to get involved and fight for, is how are we going to keep that flexible pipeline, flexible, real-time, reactive pipeline, so that the flow in the future meets our market needs. And you know, we made the mistake before of not doing that. The mistake that we made in 1986 was exactly this mistake. We passed a law, I don't know if Senator Kerry was around, passed a law that legalized the people already here, tried to toughen up enforcement, but didn't create a new pipeline. And what happened? Enforcement doesn't work very well when you don't have a pipeline. Remember what it was like to try to enforce prohibition, or imagine what it's like to try to stick to a 500-calorie diet. When your limits are out of sync with your real needs, it's really hard to enforce them. When you get your limits more into line with your needs, it's much more plausible to enforce them. So again, if we don't create the right kind of pipeline this time, trouble with enforcement, and trouble, the same kind of trouble we've had in the last 20 years, where at the end of a 5-year period, 10-year period, 20-year period, we're going to have another big pool of undocumented workers in the country. Because that dynamism of the market isn't going to end or stop. The country's going to start growing again. We're going to need the workers. There are going to be jobs Americans are too educated or not educated enough to do. And if we don't create a pipeline, unfortunately, we're going to have people coming again illegally, and in 5, 10, 20 years, we're going to have another pool of undocumented. So, you know, it's going to be a tough debate this year. I think the key in these immigration debates is always, it's a word I used earlier, but it's a word I've been thinking a lot more about lately, compromise. How are we going to get to the compromises we need so that this policy really does work for all Americans, business and unions, and a policy, left and right, and a policy that works, a policy that delivers our security, recognizes the dynamism of our markets, restores the rule of law, and is consistent with our values. And in closing, I just want to leave you with an image in closing. I really think of immigration today and globalization and immigration, which is the human face of immigration, as our era's industrial revolution. And if you think about what it would have been like to live in Europe in the middle of the Industrial Revolution, you know, what you would have noticed is a big, ugly building on your block, smoke spewing into the atmosphere, and children had to work at night. You would have noticed all the nuisances and all the difficulties of introducing the Industrial Revolution, and you probably wouldn't have seen, well, this is going to introduce a new standard of living for me and my children and future generations. And I think what we're seeing with immigration is in many ways like that. We see the nuisances, we don't necessarily see the benefits, and we don't realize that, as with the Industrial Revolution, it's probably going to take you know, decades, if not hundreds of years, to figure out how to make that globalization to sand off the rough edges, like the spewing smoke and the children working at night, so that the new phenomenon really works for us. That's what we're trying to do in Washington as we make these laws. We're about to have another debate where we try to figure out how to do that.